Very good afternoon, everybody. Welcome again to Friday Drinks. And this one is an odd one because we don't have Rufaro. I have no idea where he is. What happened to Rufaro?
No, he's somewhere out there having a weekend in a different spot. So, yeah, we just...
So he decided to abscond?
Wow. Not absconding as it were. I know where he is. I'll protect his whereabouts for now.
Well, I suppose it's Valentine's Day.
I'll protect
every lost one. Has he decided to?
He will answer for himself. He's going to come back next. We'll have him on Friday next week. All things being equal, but he just decided to take a break.
Okay. On Valentine's Day.
I don't know if it was planned or it was just coincidence.
Okay.
But, he's...
Because I remember the same time last year, we didn't believe in Valentine's. So what has happened?
Look, I think...
Does he have a new love in his life?
I think...
we're bound to speculate.
We can speculate a lot. But I would give it to him that I think he, amongst all of us, is probably the more romantic one. So I would not be surprised if this weekend getaway is some sort of Valentine thing, but I don't know, to be honest. All that I know is
it's awfully convenient on Valentine's Day. Rufaro, please let us know where exactly you are. We're surprised you're not here.
Yeah. So
and yourself, how's Valentine's Day?
It's not a day on my calendar. It's not a day on my calendar. It's just a normal day. So look, I don't have any kind of pressure. It doesn't really mean much. It's a Friday. I think that's the most important thing. I'm looking forward to the weekend.
Yeah. There's no pressure for us as men, but I'm always wondering if there's pressure for women. I mean, how do women survive? Suppose you don't get flowers or chocolates or whatever happens on Valentine's, and your man decides that he's Ranga and he doesn't believe in the day. How do you go about it? How do women survive?
Either you have to take it as it is. I mean, or maybe I've heard some actually pretend. No, they go to the extent of buying themselves some flowers.
Oh, there's an idea.
I guess if you are in a big sort of office environment, you are surrounded by
lots of social pressure.
Yeah, there's so much social pressure, so you don't want to be the odd one out. But yeah, look, you are very right that for us as guys, we don't have that pressure. But,
none whatsoever.
Yeah. Look, and also in Zim, if you move around, I don't think you get that feel that there's anything going on. So you'd expect. Do you think? If you get into some of our leading retail chains, you see any Valentine's decorations, given where they are financially, where some of them are about to close or they're facing real issues. So look, it's probably for the privileged.
Yeah. It was actually quite sad because, I was walking around the city center and the excitement that we had when we were growing up, 20 years ago or more, I didn't feel it. I didn't feel the commercial, excitement around Valentine's this time around. Especially when I even compare it to last year. I think that there's a bit of excitement, not as much as we've seen in the previous years, but I think that even this year was down. And what's worse is the ladies were not wearing red. Even in the studio, the ladies are not wearing red. I was quite surprised. Even they are not excited about it.
So look, kudos to everyone that is celebrating it and has done something. So the fact that maybe we are not believers, it does not necessarily mean that we have got anything against believers. It's a free world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a free world, and
commercially, it's a great day.
It's a
good day for industry.
Yes, it is a great day. If someone can make money out of Valentine's, then why not?
Kudos to them. Yeah. And what are we actually drinking? We don't have the resident alcoholic, so it means that we can spring clean.
Yeah. The bar is very
Sanitize it a bit.
It's very clean. It's Orange Crush for me. It's not necessarily Mazoe. I don't like that particular brand, but it's still the same manufacturer who makes the one I'm having here. So it's Orange Crush and soda
water.
Soda water.
Yeah. And I'm having Mazoe Orange Crush because I actually like Mazoe Orange Crush with soda water. That's my drink of choice. And as we said, the resident alcoholic is not here, so we've sanitized the bar. And let's make sure that the conversation is also
sober, and some sanity actually prevails in the studio. So look, we miss Shumba. Obviously, it tends to be his side of the bar tends to be the most colorful one. And that's what he believes, that his side of the bar is the most colorful one because of whatever he drinks. So I'm sure wherever he is, if he's watching the show, cheers Shumba.
So today we're going to do something different. We don't often do this, but once in a while we do so, which is just getting into the questions Q&A from a lot of you. You've got questions. I mean, every time I meet people, they have numerous questions, and we've got a list. And also on X, we've asked people, and I've seen that there's robust debates that are continuously happening on X, as well as the questions directly on that post. So we're going to get into that. But before we do the Q&A, there are a number of overarching questions that we usually get, and we're going to get into the weeds for those particular one. So the first one, I think, came out of the Herald, where the Mtuli said, monocurrency maybe not so much, it's not an immediate thing. But would you like to speak to that? Speak to what Mtuli has actually said and thoughts around that.
So he came out saying that we are, as an economy, as a country, we are not ready for monocurrency. We know that there's been this debate or some undercurrent around that the issue of the currency, whether or not we will have the multiple currency still existing in 2025 or in the next coming years, or the policy is leaning more towards monocurrency. So the minister came out clear, just saying that no, we don't have the right environment, the right conditions for that. He spoke to the issue that you love so much, the issue around reserves, that we need to have a certain level of reserves before we go monocurrency. So that we don't find ourselves in a situation where our currency comes under pressure and there's no way of defending it, which I thought is quite important. But it also raises some questions in terms of whether or not there's discord between the Treasury and RBZ. Last week here, the discussion we were having, I think what came out very clear, or maybe our conclusion was, the central bank is leaning more and more towards monocurrency. So maybe it's just a matter of timing. But so for the minister to then come out and say the conditions are not yet ripe, I actually found it to be very, okay, so what's going on?
The last time we agreed with Professor Mtuli was a very long time. So, I'm pleasantly surprised that this is something that we actually agree with him. What do you say to that?
We certainly agree with that. And look, I think what you just have to do is to look at how the market is looking like at the moment in terms of the transactions and everything. From the monetary policy statement itself, we learned that 83% of deposits are in USD and just only 17 are in local currency. And obviously, that's the formal side of the deposits in the formal sector. The informal sector is probably closer to 100 with what we are seeing. And also on the ground, we are seeing more and more transactions in USD partly because the ZiG is just not there. Even if you want to transact in ZiG, there's not much ZiG, circulating in the economy. So it really didn't have it really didn't have to be to come from the minister. I mean, like, the significance of his statement is just to buttress what you are already seeing on the ground. So even if he had announced that monocurrency is coming next week,
the market wouldn't care.
The market wouldn't care less. The market wouldn't care less, and so. Again, it speaks to the policy inconsistency that we are always talking about, where the left hand says one thing, then the right says a totally different thing. I don't see that statement as supporting the policy measures that's coming from the monetary policy.
But why do you think Treasury and Central Bank is still working in silos? And, a critical case is we saw those TBs last year that were due from Treasury and they couldn't pay them out. And that was about 177 million US dollars. Again, getting into 2025, we've got about 785 TBs million worth of TBs. But if you look at where those TBs were essentially coming from, these were legacy debts, if you remember, and these were coming from Central Bank. And it was the benevolence of Treasury to actually assume those Treasury bills. And they're now sitting with Treasury. But unfortunately, Treasury cannot pay them. But this is a historic issue, and it stems from mismanagement of the currency, primarily by the central bank. So why would the central bank not be part of those discussions on what do we do with these TBs? Because these TBs were not Treasury TBs. Treasury didn't benefit in any way. It was mismanagement of currency by central bank.
Yeah. Look, it's the way I see it is it's just there were some structural issues there, where ordinarily central bank has to support the fiscal side, but over the years we've actually seen the central bank assuming some of the tasks that ordinarily should be done by the Treasury. The era of Gideon Gono with his quasi-fiscal activities. And I don't think those have really gone away that much. You also saw Governor Mangunjka resorting to that. And the new governor has tried to put a stop to that. But we still see a lot of that silo mentality where, instead of these two policies speaking in sync, they seem to be actually quite divergent. Not only divergent, but there seems to be a lot of competition between
discord.
Discord. And I don't know what needs to be done. In fact, I mean, that's the role of whether it's the executive branch or parliament, to try and make sure those two speak to each other. Because if they don't, we will continue to
have problems.
To have problems that we have right now.
And as they say, when two elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. Continuing with monocurrency, the Mtuli saying that won't happen anytime soon. But when we read the monetary policy statement, there's a threat around your cash boxes, that they're going to go after those cash boxes. So if we're in a multi-currency, it really shouldn't care where we and what we do with our US dollar cash. But what are your thoughts on that?
There is that apprehension in the market on whether, the policymakers will follow through on that one. But that's really a very dumb move. And what really worries me is, so the latest pronouncements are coming from central bank. But I think late last year also, the minister, when he was announcing his the national budget, the 2025 budget, he mentioned that. So what is becoming very clear is this is a discussion that is being had within the government corridors, and it's worrying. It's worrying on a number of issues because, look, whatever reason that may be given, this is still private property. We are still to come out of problems that we created by expropriating private property. we want to go after private property, even the one that is the most, private, or the closest one. We took land. Land was taken because it was, it was taken from our forefathers, and the justification.
The historic reasons.
Yeah, the historical imbalances. They try to correct things, but when you go after cash box, what is the justification? I think we need to, they need to step back and ask themselves the question: why is it that the public does not have confidence in the banking sector? I really wonder if even the proponents of all such moves really do keep their money in the bank.
In the banking sector. And the other thing is IMTT was actually introduced by the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development. So there's a lot of friction. So putting money in the banking sector, it comes with a lot of friction. So you put $100, people will say this continuously. You put $100 and in a month or within six months
it's
without
gone.
doing anything.
Oh yes, I actually experienced it.
Maybe speak to that. Maybe speak to your personal experience.
I actually experienced it with my bank, which I will not mention, but one day I will name and shame the bank. So I had some money. It wasn't a lot. It was that $100. I didn't use the account for some months. Yeah, and so then what happens is when I received an inflow some months later, then I realized that the entire amount where the $100 had been used up. And in addition, they took $45 from the new deposit. So they were just waiting for the day that a deposit...
You're already in overdraft.
Yeah, I was already in overdraft. Yeah. And then you start asking yourself...
is it worth it?
Is it worth it? Well, what am I getting?
So and you're not even you're not transacting. So imagine if you're transacting.
Exactly.
And you hit 2%. So that's the friction within the financial services sector. And the other reality is there's just not lending. There's not much lending. And when there is lending, then you've got the government being the biggest borrower. So they're crowding out the private sector. So it doesn't make sense. So please, Minister, when we talk about cash boxes and we talk about the financial services sector, let's just keep that in mind, that there's a lot of friction within the financial services and it doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
But and also it's putting the public into great risk. Because if someone then decides to say, okay, my money is no longer safe at the cash deposit facilities, and you decide to keep it home, imagine the chaos that's going to, to result from that. You have actually taken away the security, not just of the money, but also of the people themselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's really now not necessary, and the impact of that is obviously capital flight. Already, if someone was holding huge amounts of cash in this box, I suppose at this point in time they are already taking that money out. And problem, we said that last week again, that it's always very difficult to bring money back.
Absolutely.
The good thing about money which is in a safe deposit box is it's onshore.
It's actually in country.
It's in country. So if you want to spend, if you want to use it on something, it's basically it's some sort of your saving that you always want to access. Ideally, you would want those funds to be in a bank, but obviously people are not stupid. They lost money in the banks, so they would.
And the cost of maintaining a cash box is actually lower than money in a banking, which it boggles the mind really. But let's move on. On the 13th of February, we had an IMF SMP discussion, Mission to Zimbabwe, and I think that there's something that we can actually talk about. Okay. And the IMF team had meetings with Professor Mtuli and then the Permanent Secretary for Finance Economic Development, that's George Guamatanga. They also spoke to the RBZ Governor, John Mushayabanu, and then the Chief Secretary to the President and Cabinet, Martin Rushwaya, and other senior government and RBZ officials, honorable members of parliament, representative of the private sector, civil society, and Zimbabwe's development partners. So, a wide range of people. And I think that to do justice, what we will do is there critically three things that we want to talk about. And I think I'm going to just read out so that, for the benefit of everybody, from some who didn't actually get to read this, but and then we can analyze it from there. So it says Zimbabwe's economic activity has started recovering from El Nino-induced drought. Growth slowed from 5.3% to an estimated 2% in 2024 as the drought lowered agricultural output by 15%. This was compounded by reduced electricity production and declining prices for key mineral exports. That said, strong remittances continue supporting activity in the domestic trade, services, construction, and improved current account surplus to an estimated 500 million, which is 1.5% of GDP in 2024. The ZiG willing buyer, willing seller exchange rate was stable from ZiG introduction in April 2024, with the ZiG month-on-month inflation averaging 2.3% until September, when the currency weakened. Relative stability returned with the tightening of the monetary policy since September, and the willing buyer, willing seller, and parallel market exchange rates have stabilized, and the gap between these rates has narrowed. Meanwhile, fiscal pressure intensified, owing in large part to the transfer of RBZ's quasi-fiscal operations to Treasury. Strong revenue collection helped limit the 2024 budget deficit to an estimated 1% of GDP, but fiscal pressure resulted in accumulation of domestic expenditure arrears, leading to government implementing emergency spending cuts. Going forward, growth in 2025 is projected to increase to 6% with a recovery in agricultural output due to better climate conditions and projected improvements in terms of trade. This reads like Ministry of Finance, and lots of people don't realize what happens with these reports from the IMF is what eventually comes out to us, to analysts and to the media, is a back and forth with Treasury. So that statement is not necessarily coming from the IMF team.
So it ends up just reflecting the views and the thinking of Treasury. Yeah, because when I went through it, I didn't quite see anything that was really, that I thought, okay, this is quite revealing. So
it's a song that we've heard numerous times from the Ministry of Finance. But having said that, do you think that there was growth last year? So even the 2% that they talk about, especially considering that we had two major devaluations in currency. If you remember, we started off the year with a Zim dollar that depreciated. I think it moved from, I think it was around 20-something thousand to 40,000.
Wow.
Before it crashed.
I'd almost forgotten that.
you had forgotten that, right? Before it crashed.
Yes.
In fact, it ended the year around 12,000, but began the year before it crashed and it got to about 40,000.
Yes.
Then we started with ZiG at 13, and then we ended the year with ZiG at 26, which is around 40, almost 50% depreciation on the ZiG. And then when you add the Zim dollar depreciation, you're getting closer and closer to 90% depreciation. That means the Zim dollar lost about 90% of its value just in 1 year. So when you consider all that, do you still believe that there was growth?
No. I didn't. There is no growth really talk about. I mean, the issue that you have articulated there, we experienced a decline in the agriculture sector, always a significant one. It may probably contribute a small percentage, maybe to the overall economy. But whenever I've got a drought, the negative contributions is quite huge in terms of the importation needs, the needs to provide a safety net for people that may be struggling to feed themselves. So whenever you have got a negative performance from the agriculture sector, usually, I mean, there's a sort of a direct correlation in terms of the performance of that sector to the overall GDP performance. Then the lower electricity production, I mean, that was the big story for last year, where we are having load shedding for more than 20 hours in a day. In fact, you'll be very lucky to have power for like 6 hours in a typical day. So you obviously know how that affects production,
quite substantial,
and productivity. And then we had this whole issue of falling mineral prices. So it means even our mining sector was also affected. So I don't.
And then imports as well.
Yeah.
And imports are negative as far as GDP is concerned.
In this report, they then are alluding to strong remittances, which they said they bolstered domestic trade. So the remittances were quite. The growth there was quite significant, but I don't see how this would offset the negative outturn from other sectors of the economy. And when you've got remittances in an environment where there's a drought, and you've got power issues, you've got falling mineral prices, these are basically coming to to support families actually to get by, survival, as opposed to growing
bolstering economic growth and activity and manufacturing. Because that's the other thing.
The current instability that you're already speaking about.
And the other thing that we hardly ever talk about is gross capital formation. And if you think about ZIM, this has been less than 10%. If you really critically look at the numbers, and the average for emerging market, do you know what it is? It's closer to 35%.
Wow. So, and you are doing less than 10%.
We're doing less than, in real terms, we're doing less than 10%. I mean, South Africa is suffering, and it's only at 15%, right? Places like China get up to 60%. Whatever dollar that they're getting, only 40% is being used
into
for consumptive.
Okay.
Yeah, but a lot of it is going into investment. And I think that's the big issue, because you cannot talk about growth unless there is intensive capital formation. And that's the telltale sign. If there's no capital formation, then you know that the growth is actually not real. Is just playing around with numbers. And I suppose that's why we need multi-currency, because as long as you've got ZIM dollar, because what the US dollar will do is they will expose you. It will expose just how bad things are. But having said that, I think that the one thing that they've talked about, we'll get into it. It says, against this background, the Zimbabwean authorities had requested an SMP to support the efforts to stabilize the economy and re-engage with the international community on the arrears clearance and debt resolution process. The main objective of SMP will be to durably anchor macroeconomic stability, building on policy recommendations from the 2024 Article 4 consultations. So, building on the progress achieved during the mission on the ongoing SMP discussion, fund staff will continue working closely with the authorities on defining the key parameters and modalities of the program. Discussions include adjusting the fiscal position to avoid a recourse to monetary financing and new arrears, and building foundation for a durable fiscal consolidation. Fiscal risks residing off budget, including from the operation of Mutapa Investment Fund.
I thought it was a sovereign wealth fund.
The effectiveness of monetary policy framework for ZiG and reforms to strengthen economic governance. I think of these four issues, so let's take them one by one. So the first one is adjusting the fiscal position to avoid recourse to monetary financing and new arrears. This goes down to just government expenditure. We've been saying this since 1980. This is a country that's now it's like a middle-aged man. And we've been saying it since 1980. If you read what Chizero was saying, it's just unsustainable expenditure. And here we are, 45 years later, and we're talking about government unsustainable expenditure. We are never going to get rid of this, are we?
And if you are a 45-year-old, your parents have been telling you to be careful with your finances, and at 45, I think you are a lost cause, eh? I mean, given that analogy of a person. So after 45 years of trying, what else would you expect? But the way I look at our expenditure, is I think a bigger part of it. There's a lot of waste. There's a lot of corrupt activities.
But could I put to you that I have a different perspective to this when I look at government expenditure. When I look at corruption, I don't think it's any different from the rest of Africa. When I look at waste, we've seen what's happening in America. That's very relevant. But I would say that the thing that is unique about Zimbabwe has to do with political expenditure. Because the tensions, if you really think about it, even in the 1980s, where expenditure was highest, it was just around political expenditure.
Okay, maybe you may need to explain what you...
So when I say political expenditure, is anything around elections. So we go through these election cycles, and every time there's an election, then there are lots and lots of freebies. And then we end up having to spend more than we need to retain power. And that happened in the 80s, that happened in the 90s, and that has continued happening, especially now that we've had a series of opposition politics, a stronger opposition since 2000. And I think that that's part of the problem, is just political expenditure to actually retain power. And I have intimated that we saw this in May of 2016, when we introduced the bond note. There was no need to really introduce the bond note. Yes, there was pressure on the fiscal and monetary policy, but we had about 5 billion, which one could argue that not all of it was real, but it was manageable. But when you look at May 2016 and what happened by November, is we printed more than $3 billion US. Totally unnecessary. That's more than 66% of the monetary. We debased the money by closer to 66%. Totally unnecessary. And I think that the reason why it was unnecessary is because of succession politics. And that's, again, we're getting into that mode. So whenever politics comes into governance, then there's a lot of expenditure that is unwarranted just to retain power or just to win power. And I think that if we could somewhat resolve the political issues, however we might do it, I think that then the political pressure is not there. Lots of Zimbabweans, even in the rural areas, they just want to get on with their business. But the problem is politics has now just dominated our environment and our economy. Right now, this issue of succession politics is now a big issue. Rather than people getting on with the business of investing, investors are just going to hold back, whether they're foreign or domestic. They're just going to hold back because nobody knows what's actually going to happen. So it's a wait and see, and only after can we start thinking about maybe another 5 years. But we cannot have this continuously. So I think that the fiscal expenditure is not necessarily coming out of waste and corruption. Believe you me, I'm not saying that there's no waste, there's no corruption, but I'm just saying that a lot of it has to do with political expediency and political expenditure. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, it's a very interesting point that you are raising there. But you see, the way I look at it is, it's not really bad. If you are spending for political reasons and you are doing that carefully, I think even the Chinese that you have given examples of, I think there's always a political angle whenever a public institution spend. But I think theirs is more thought out. So if you are allocating 60% of your budget towards gross capital formation, you are basically building for the next generation. So just imagine all those years from the 1980s, even if the government, the politicians of the day were sort of fixated on, remaining in power, and they'd taken a position where they're like, okay, let's develop this country. And instead of below 10% allocation to capital formation, maybe it was 30, 35, and they are building this huge base from which private sector could then start, producing and growing the economy. I think we could still have had some positive results. Mm-hmm. So I think a case can be made that, you know what, it's not mutually exclusive. It's not necessarily mutually exclusive that, a government or politician could pursue a purely political agenda, which is to maintain and retain power, but doing that in a more responsible way where you're also growing your economy. The reason why I'd raised the issue of waste and expense and corruption, just look at some of the programs that we have as part of that political, financing, as it were. For example, related to command or related to inputs, right? Mm-hmm. There hasn't been any work, at least we haven't seen it in the public domain, where, every year, like what you do in private sector. So you have your budget, and then at the end of the year, before you embark on the next year's budget, you are reviewing last year's budget, right? Mm. You are saying, okay, fine, this is how I've missed the targets. These are the variants. And you try to understand the source of the variance. And then imagine if they were doing that, they could have picked up earlier on to say, you know what, some of these projects, they actually, the request that they're getting and the amounts that they're allocating is actually way more than the value.
Ranga, the mistake that you're making. Mm. It's in private sector, we have return on equity. Mm-hmm. Here, it's return on politics. Yeah, and the return on politics was huge as far as command is concerned.
But you see, there were huge political returns. That's being short-sighted. Because you have got this so-called return in that particular year, but you have created extensive damage that will make it very difficult for you next year to be able to do a program.
Well, the IMF is picking up this, and as we've intimated before, if this issue is being picked up by the IMF, it's not necessarily coming from the IMF. Mm. It means that these are conversations that government itself is having. So let's take the second point. As far as, don't look at it as this is IMF speaking, but look at it as this is the Ministry of Finance speaking. And then this is what they say. They say fiscal risk residing off budget, including from the operations of Mutapa Investment Fund. Mm-hmm. Does this mean that Treasury is not happy with what's actually happening at Mutapa? Give us color. What's actually happening there?
I don't know, but I think what is coming out very clear is the fact that you've got a vehicle that is operating outside the fiscus, and yet whenever its funding has to come from the fiscus at some point, it creates problems potentially. And I don't know if that was the objective of Mutapa, but you see, the idea was sold as a sovereign wealth fund. So you're actually trying to create wealth.
And now you're a cost
yes,
the fiscus.
Not only are you a cost, you're actually a problem because you're off balance sheet. If it was on balance sheet, it means even as the Treasury is doing its budget, they need to consciously say, okay, how much are we going to allocate to this entity, and why should we do that? But because it's off balance sheet, it seems to have a life of its own, and people can make decisions outside maybe, the policy framework, then it creates a lot of problems. And I'm not surprised. I mean, when you just look at the entities that were put in Mutapa, it's more like, like a graveyard. Most of them are dead. I mean, and you'd ask yourself, so what's your first task when you are running that thing? There's no wealth to be created.
But now what it means is we now have two, maybe not centers of power, but three entities that are running in their silos, but are siphoning or jeopardizing the economic stability of the country, because now you have Mutapa, which is a behemoth in itself, and then you have Treasury, and the expenditure is just unbridled. Then you have the central bank, and the central bank, its mismanagement of the currency. So that is a hodgepodge of chaos.
Indeed, that's a recipe for disaster. And I think what is needed is to have some authority that has got oversight over those, over the three of them, and to ensure that, when you are crafting strategy, whether you are Mutapa or your central bank or you are the Treasury, you don't operate as if you are separate from the other entity, because at the end of the day, so if Mutapa needs to be funded, it will go to the Treasury, and if the Treasury doesn't have the resources, we sometimes see central bank jumping in with monetary financing. So because of that, there's this linkage which is there, and whatever negative outcomes that from one entity, they sort of cascades. They go all the way to the other entity. So there's need to make sure that there is a congruency. In
so
terms
again,
of
if we go into this and we read this IMF report as really essentially Treasury.
But anyway, before you go there, I would have when the idea of the sovereign wealth fund was mooted, and then we actually had it created, I thought maybe we would start off with some assets that would really create some wealth, right? And then you do it over a sort of a phased period. And there must be some strategy in terms of what exactly are they trying to what.
Well, you know how I feel about this. Just privatize all of them. Even if you sell all of them for $1 and the debt is pushed over to private sector, it means that there's no fiscal risk that's residing off.
So you mean you privatize these ailing ones, but still maintain the sovereign wealth structure? Because I saw Trump there was some report that the Americans also want
sovereign wealth fund, and I think Rufaro and I agree on this. These are the sort of things that wealthy countries do, and they do so badly.
Okay.
Right, and they can afford to do so badly, because my idea is if government has enough wealth like that, they should just give it back to the citizens. Because essentially, this is taxpayers' money. You took taxpayers' money, and now you're thinking you can run taxpayers' money better than the citizens themselves. You could invest it better than the citizens itself. I mean, we've seen the sort of waste and fraud that's actually happening in American bureaucracy. So there's no way bureaucracy could run a sovereign wealth better than the citizens themselves. And there's no way a bureaucracy could take care of my grandkids better than myself. So the idea is, if you do have access as a bureaucracy, give it back to the citizens and let the citizens invest. In fact, that's how you then create a very robust capital market system, because you realize that citizens have got enough savings and they would like to invest for their grandkids or for their children. And the best way we can do so as a bureaucracy is just creating a very viable and robust market system. That's how I would do it. So, but yes, very rich countries can afford it, but it's still waste at the end of the day.
Maybe it was our way to richness.
Absolutely not, because we've seen just how a bureaucracy is wasteful. But anyway, I want to go to this third point. And let's take this third point as a reminder that this report is actually essentially coming from Treasury. And this is what Treasury is trying to tell the other centers of power. And this one is directed to the RBZ. And this is what Treasury is saying to the RBZ. The effectiveness of monetary policy framework for ZiG and reforms to strengthen economic governance. So 3, they're saying we need to define parameters and modalities and discuss the effectiveness of monetary policy. Now, it means that Treasury has misgivings because we read the MPS, and the MPS is saying, hey, we're doing a fantastic job as far as monetary policy is concerned. But when we read what Treasury is saying, they're saying, well, we don't think that monetary policy framework is effective, especially pertaining to ZiG. And if you remember Thule's statement where he comes out and he says, and he's talking about reserves, maybe speak to that as well.
Yeah, so look, it's I think this aspect is actually very, very important because you know, what's coming out is we need to have effective policies, and you know, if one was to ask and say right now, in terms of the policy framework which is there, has it been effective in trying to stabilize the ZiG or to support ZiG stability? It's really, I don't think you'd get some positive response there, because what has happened is the central bank has literally sucked up liquidity from the market to a point where ZiG is virtually non-existent. You know, it hasn't been given an opportunity to be operating, to be one of the transacting currency, and then be able to gauge how it will perform if it's actually being used as a transacting currency, as it were. They sucked up every, you know, ZiG amount that is coming onto the market to a point where the economy is actually becoming more and more dollarized. So I would understand the misgivings from the Treasury that you know, maybe we need to do more in terms of the policy environment if we in the efforts to try and support ZiG stability. And what Thule was saying this week about you know, the route to monocurrency and the fact that we need to have a certain amount, a certain level of reserve to support it. It's spot on. It's spot on. And you see, when I saw that statement, I went back in history and came across another statement that was made by the then governor of Central Bank, Dr. Mangwenjika, you know, where he was very quite vocal about the need to delay introducing a local currency and say, no, we didn't have the necessary conditions for that to come. But a few months down the line, the ZWL was introduced. But so what I can read from this is there's actually discord in that setup. There's a camp that is pro monocurrency. They want it like tomorrow. And then there are some, you know, reasonable voices that are saying, oh, okay, maybe the idea is good, but the timing is what?
Bad.
It's bad. At least if you have got this idea, maybe these are some things that you need to have in place, you know, before you can introduce it. Yeah. So again, from this, you can't judge.
All right. I'm just weary of our time. So we just need to move to the questions. But I think that gives us a good background. And I will start with a question from Tindo. And he says, given that the governor has increased export retentions by 5%, this is from 25% to 30%, and seemingly gold reserves are increasing materially, can we get to a scenario where the ZiG rate can actually be defended? That is, it won't tank like before.
There's no convertibility between ZiG and the reserves. I think Central Bank made it very clear. Mutuli made that very clear. You remember that clip of his that went viral? That when you say ZiG is begged, we are just saying it's begged. It doesn't mean... I don't know what he was saying.
Yeah, I think the market hasn't seen the fungibility and convertibility.
Yes.
And as long as the market doesn't have that, because market confidence is purely from trading. So you can't tell us and you can't audit the reserves and say that they're there, but we can't see them in the market. I think once the market starts seeing that, but again, even if there is convertibility, will the central bank hold its course if government expenditure gets to unsustainable levels? If Mutapa continues with its off budget expenditure and deals, it's like it's a double whammy that you're now getting from Mutapa and from Treasury. And can monetary policies sustain that pressure? Maybe they can, but eventually they will bulk to political pressure. Like I said, because the big question is the political pressure, the political question. As long as the political question hasn't been asked, then it's just a very difficult trading environment for all three branches of our monetary system. Because now we have Mutapa, Treasury, and central bank.
So for me, the day that I just decided to say this whole talk about the reserves is nonsensical, is when the rate in September, when we just woke up, the rate was
44% devaluation. Yeah,
there was a 44% devaluation. For me, what that said was, there was actually no currency there was no reserve to back this currency, because it was at that point where the ZiG
they should have acted.
They should have acted to back, but they didn't. So you can't have a currency that is backed by some reserves, devaluing.
And the reserves are actually not acting. Okay, let's
the
move
purpose
on.
of the reserves is to at least maintain it closer to where you think the value
should be. Yeah. Okay, so Cameron Pitchford says, one question I have is around cost competitiveness of ZIM professionals versus Europe, USA. I'm thinking in terms of outsourcing and the potential for ZIM as an outsourcing destination. Is there much of an outsourcing industry in Zimbabwe? If not, why not? What are the factors that are limiting growth? Okay, I can speak to this one. So ZIM does have a competitive advantage when you consider other nations, and here primarily looking at India and the Philippines and South Africa to a less extent, but I think India and the Philippines are quite big outsourcers. And I would say that the competitive advantage, because there are three things that you look at. So it's labor, and it's space, and these are buildings, and then it's technology. So technology is now agnostic because it's more or less the same price. You pay more or less the same price whether in India and Philippines or in Zimbabwe. Labor, I would say that India and the Philippines still have competitive advantages there, and I think ZIM maybe less so. But I think where ZIM is quite substantial, because when you look at the outsourcing market, you're looking at really real estate and space to actually host your people. And I would say that that's where ZIM actually has a very big competitive advantage, because rent in ZIM is way cheaper than you will find in India, even in South Africa or in the Philippines. So that adds up, because it's more almost, the factors when you look at labor, technology, and rentals. And this is using a McKinsey report that was done about 5 years ago, that those are the three elements that really one must look at when they consider outsourcing markets. And then the other thing that I think that ZIM has an advantage is an educated working class that is highly unemployed. And if you think about it, that's a good positive, because it means that you're able to retain skill set for a much longer period. Where ZIM has a disadvantage, it has to do with government policy, because when you're going out there in the international market, the first thing that you're selling is Zimbabwe. It's less the country itself. You're going out there and you're actually selling ZIM. So investors or customers, the first question that they'll ask is, what is Zimbabwe offering? And if you look at elsewhere, you look at Rwanda, if you look at South Africa, if you look at Kenya, if you look at the guys we're competing with, they're government incentives, as far as tax is concerned, as far as regulation is concerned, that make it more conducive for businesses to be in those spaces. So I don't think that the politics is much of a problem as far as ZIM is concerned, but I think it just has to do with ease of doing business. It's just very difficult to do business in Zimbabwe, and I think if we work on that, and if we make Zimbabwe more competitive as far as tax is concerned, because why would somebody come here to ZIM and invest in ZIM in an outsourcing market when they could easily do so in the Philippines and get 10-year tax reprieve? And here we all know what's happening with ZIMRA. But anyway, that's a question for another day. But yes, is there an advantage? I think there is. But there are also serious disadvantages that we need to address.
Maybe a quick comment on that issue is, I don't think in terms of the policymakers or the policy environment, there's a realization or acknowledgement that it's actually a low-hanging fruit for Zimbabwe, the outsourcing business. Because like I've said, we've got the people, we've got a young, fairly educated population. And you see, pretty much every one of them is looking for exits, ways of getting out of the country. And mainly because they are looking for opportunities. So what if we sort of package it, all those people that are going out there trying to lure investors. So maybe one of the things that you can, sell to prospective investors is, you quantify, we know the number of people who are coming out of colleges, out of, universities, or call it, let's say it's 50,000 a year, whatever number it is. And then we have got this big number of youngsters that are coming from colleges, universities, etc., maybe 20,000, 30,000 of them. They represent an opportunity for outsourcing. And, I think quite a number of them would love the idea.
Yeah. We do need intentional government policy on it. Okay. Next one, because we've got lots of questions that we need to cover. And I must, that's Beta Mosi, says, how did Zimbabwe pension funds deal with the hyperinflation environment in paying out pensioners? What could be the best ways for a pension fund to get away from a problem or from problems like that?
Well, how do they? They actually are still struggling with that question up to now, because
it's still smarting from 2008.
From 2008, hyperinflation period. Value was lost, but it was not of their own making. Value was lost mostly because of the policy directives that were on the ground. In particular, the policy around, a directive that was forcing pension funds to invest in what are termed prescribed assets. These are just TBs. So quite a number of the smaller pension funds found themselves having, a bigger exposure in government treasuries at a time when hyperinflation was really hitting hard. So that value was wiped out, and because at that point, some of these smaller outfits didn't quite have the capacity to be able to invest in other asset classes, whether, for example, properties and maybe even equities. The TBs were sold as, the safest place to go. And the regulation at the time was you needed to have, I don't remember the number, probably it was 35% of your assets in TB. So that's 35% of your balance sheet that is wiped off completely. Have they learned something? They have. I think that's why you see a number of them going into property. So they are doing property, student accommodations,
just to retain that.
Just to retain value.
At least you'll have buildings.
Yeah, going into other private equity.
Because the problem hasn't gone away.
No, the problem hasn't gone away. And the main culprit in court, keeps on behaving the same way.
Behaving badly.
Behaving badly. That is from the policy side.
Tino says, if you, Mr. Tinashe, were to be appointed finance minister today, what will be your first? What will be your first 3 decisions that you will make as first steps to restore confidence in the economy and encourage trust in the banking system? First of all,
Minister Mkanya, you can take us through.
First of all, I'm a libertarian, so I don't believe in government, and I don't believe that change can actually come with a bureaucracy. So I think principally and philosophically, I do not believe that that's the best way.
Maybe they'll bring you in as a turnaround strategist just for 1 year. What will you do? I think that's the question.
I think the point is, what is my advice?
Okay.
And not for me to be within the bureaucracy, because I think that we need a critical amount of people who sit outside the bureaucracy and put pressure on the bureaucracy to act, because the easiest way of getting away with things is to co-opt. So if there's criticism from business or from analysts, then all you do is to just...
You bring them in.
You bring them in, knowing specifically that they won't be able to change. And that way, you then quieten, or the contrary voices then die out. So I think as a libertarian, I feel very strongly that what we need to do is to change the culture. And I don't mean the government culture. I mean the voters' culture. If voters still want free medical aid, free education, sovereign wealth funds, then it's very easy for politicians and the bureaucracy to continue doing, political expenditure and the way things are at the moment. So my advice to the culture and to society, not necessarily as Minister of Finance, but just to the culture, is that what we essentially need to do is we need to change the culture. If people take responsibility and they say, no, we're willing to pay school fees, but we will determine how that school is run.
But
we're willing to pay.
But it's not like
hospitals.
it's not like people are asked whenever these things are put into place. Or so there is a new sovereign wealth fund.
People are the ones who vote. So whenever there's a new sovereign wealth fund, they should say, actually, we're not in agreement with that, because that's taking our money. You are a bureaucracy. You serve at our behest, and you cannot take our money.
I think that's like putting too much.
That's what I believe in.
Expectation on the people.
Well, this is why we have this podcast. Is essentially to change the culture.
Yeah.
Politics is
that
downstream.
Will take like years, eh?
And that's why we're doing it. Before our hair get I've already lost my hair. But anyway, the reason why we're doing this is because we know it takes a lot of time. This is not something that you can do within a year. This is over time. But essentially, if we change the culture and the expectation, we actually say, you know what, you can hold your government to account. There are better ways of doing it, and these guys are not doing it. We give you the blueprint of how to do it. We said we need a currency board, and the currency board needs to sit outside of Zimbabwe, because we can piggyback on the South African Reserve Bank or any other international bank, that we can piggyback on the trust and faith that that particular institution already holds. There are ways in which financial markets do this. There's nothing unusual. When Switzerland, Germany was coming out of the World War II, all their gold reserves were in Fort Knox in America, because America was the largest trading zone for Germany. So to give the financial markets the confidence, and investors, foreign investors, the confidence that Germany knew what it was doing and that they actually had the reserves, they shipped the reserves to Fort Knox. So an American bank could go into Fort Knox and could see the reserves, and then could extend a line of credit to
But do you know
Germany.
do you know why it will be difficult in this part of the world?
Nothing is ever difficult, my friend.
Politicians are afraid of giving up their political sovereignty.
If Germany could, why can't we? Let's go on to the next one. Festo Monetsi says, we're told that the RBZ will bring new ZiG notes with higher denominations. wouldn't this bring back some form of hyperinflation? What are your thoughts on that?
As far as I'm concerned, the notes are really inconsequential, because real inflation is actually inflation or hyperinflation. Hyperinflation activities we are seeing is driven mostly by electronic money, by the RTGS, so money in the bank, or when you transfer it amongst ourselves. So the notes, I think what they will just do is offer some, some convenience to people who want to, especially the ones that are commuting. Fine, it will create some room for, a power market activity, but for smaller amounts, maybe
I
10, $20 worth of activity. But the real issue is when people are transacting or transferring each other 2 billion ZiG and etc. That is the component that is
we need to
inflationary.
So
inflationary, yeah.
T1 Tony Mark, you've got 2 questions, and I think these are best addressed by Zia here. And he says, why is it so difficult to invest on the Zimbabwean capital markets? It makes no sense for a country in need of capital. I can open an account with eToro or Trading 212 and invest in Western capital markets in 5 minutes. That's a question to you.
It's not difficult. It's not difficult because there are so many avenues. So you can one can do it using the USSD code on their mobile.
Could you share in the comment section?
Yes, I'll share. So you can do that on the USSD code, or you can do that by way of going online. There's a platform called ZSC Direct. So this USSD one is C-Trade, and then if the activity is much higher, you use ZSC Direct. And if you think you want to invest a fairly sizable amount, then you talk to the broker. And if you speak to me as a broker, I'll open your account in less than 20 minutes.
Share the details below.
Yeah, so I'll share the details. It's not
difficult.
Yeah.
Okay. Then another farming question for you: what's the price per hectare for a government title deed? Remember, they've predicted that the process will raise 13 billion. I think this is still speculation at this point. We'll get the details later on. Sir Taku says, not a question per se, but I would love to hear your views on the IMF SMP discussion mission. We've already discussed that.
I've got a comment for you here on the issue that you have raised about Germany, how they went to an American bank. A live comment from James Chinyahara. He says, Germany is an enlightened society, Tinashe. Here, the culture is driven by widespread ignorance of issues.
Well, that's why we're doing this, right? Because we think that...
Thanks, James, for that comment. And to our viewers, we would love to hear from you even as the show is
going on. Yeah.
And we'll have some shout out for you.
Good one, James. Gold 78 finger. Gold finger. Is somebody who loves 007, I assume. He says, government expenditures are increasing disproportionately to revenue. Does this country and its GDP support such expenditure, or should we seriously begin to implement austerity measures? Isn't it time we have another structural adjustment program? I think you're dead right. It's time we have that. But unfortunately, we haven't been linked to, we don't have, the IMF used to push this because the last time we had a structural adjustment program, it was actually pushed by our creditors. But unfortunately, this time around, our creditors are somewhat lackadaisical and they haven't really pushed it. We've owed them for over 30 years. We've got this re-engagement and debt assumption programs, Adesina and Chisano, but it doesn't really look like it's heading anywhere. So it needs to come from us.
Yeah, but I thought you'll talk about the $20 million US dollar payment to
bilateral. That's a good thing, but it falls short of the $21 billion debt that we actually need to look at. So it's a gesture, a very good one that we support, but it falls far short of what we actually need to. So Grant Weir says, if someone gave me a new car as a gift, would they be tax implications for me? Yep. Right? Would you like to speak to that from a Zimmer perspective?
I wouldn't have specifics.
Yeah. As a gift, a gift above a certain value attracts tax.
But it then depends on how you craft it. So look,
is there a way in which you can get around it?
Of course, we give each other things on a regular basis.
Yeah, but we don't do so publicly.
Yeah, why do you want to give each other publicly?
No, because Grant is being very. Grant is being
does
very
not allow
crafty.
you to do that.
There's a way in which there's a reason why Grant has raised this issue.
I know. He's trying to draw us into some issues that no, we don't have to go there.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the producer Grant, and that's as far as we can go.
He should ask the people directly, or Zimra, direct them to the people who are giving each other big gifts and etc. That's not
So,
what
Grant, you've heard it all for yourself. Then my son Changamire 263 says, what is the relationship between Kuvimba and Mutapa?
Kuvimba is an investee company of Mutapa.
Simplify that.
Kuvimba is one of the companies that fall under the Mutapa. So Mutapa is the sovereign wealth fund.
And all the mining assets are under Kuvimba.
Yes, all government mining assets are under Kuvimba. And then Kuvimba is
sits
one
on top of.
Yeah, it sits on top of.
Mutapa sits on top of Kuvimba.
Of Kuvimba, alongside other government-related businesses.
Then we have Gaza says, the Trump administration is cutting funding to Africa. Is our government ready to fill the gap and support health systems? I think it's a good question that we pose to the Ministry of Finance as well as the central bank governor. Trade aid, USAID spent close to $309 million as far as aid is concerned in Zimbabwe. So the big question is, that's a substantial amount. A lot of it comes in as goods and services, but there's a lot of payments to the workers and to local suppliers, and a lot of that money is embedded in our financial services system. And I would have loved to have heard the governor speak directly to this. That are we aware of this, and are we comfortable with how we can actually mitigate, that aid freeze that came from America. And then from Ministry of Finance is, as far as the healthcare sector is concerned, I mean, in total, we get close to 800 million. And a lot of it, in fact, more than 50% of it, is actually in the healthcare sector. But then government has said, yes, we are aware and we're able to cover. But I think what is missing is something that's actually, that we can read and we can understand and we can formulate that there is a strategy. We haven't seen that. Thoughts on that?
Look, I know that maybe in terms of the law, the Minister of Finance announces the budget around November, December, and then a supplementary budget midway through the year. But I think a shock in the financial position of this nature deserves some sort of a supplementary budget right after the announcement, because it's not like government was operating with huge surpluses where they would just reallocate or redirect those surpluses to this, because the need is now.
Yeah, it's imminent.
Yeah, USAID stopped funding those things on that day, right? So day number one, from that day up to where we are in the rest of the year, that need remains imminent.
Absolutely.
So obviously, it's not. It's not the kind of occurrence that just requires the ministry to say, we've got a plan. We want to know the plan.
The surprising thing is when we got a shot in the arm, as far as the IMF SDRs were concerned. They did exactly what you're saying.
Yes.
And they came out and this is how we're going to go about it. Well, this is another equal earthquake in our system where aid is being frozen or withheld. And we need a plan. How are we going to cover that? And we need something that is comprehensive and, addresses the market and gives the market confidence. I think we've done enough of the questions and, our time is up. But this was good. Was it sober enough without Shumba?
No. It went on very, very well. There's one aspect of the IMF SMP report which I found very,
It's not SMP, it's just a report.
The mission. The mission, report. Yes. Yeah. Where they're saying, okay, after all is said and done, what does it mean to the future financial arrangement with the IMF? And it's very clear that, they are expecting a clear debt restructuring framework. So basically they're saying we will not access concessionary funding from them until we have got a clear debt restructuring framework. We have cleared our areas and we have got a comprehensive reform strategy which ensure long-term stability and inclusive growth. So this is just them coming, giving an opinion, but not necessarily carrying any gifts for us.
Well, on that note, and Shumba, we do miss you. We hope you're with us next week, and we get to know what you actually did for Valentine's, that you had to abandon us like this. But everyone else, have yourself a wonderful weekend. Be safe, and see you next time. Cheers.
Cheers.
Zaita. How many minutes was that?